Last summer in our quiet little mountain community where everyone knows everyone's business and the law thinks they rule the land like medieval lords, I thought I'd seen it all. Noise complaints about wind chimes, fines for painting your shutters the wrong shade of beige, and even someone being threatened with legal action for leaving their Christmas lights up until February. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the saga of Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the WA who believed that her family's needs were somehow more important than the rights of anyone else, including me, a guy who just wanted peace, quiet, and to be left alone in my log cabin tucked away on a few acres I worked my whole life to buy. And the real kicker is that the entire nightmare started because of a small guest cabin on my property that I had built years ago for visiting relatives, but which apparently in Karen's twisted worldview should be reallocated to her family since her in-laws were visiting from out of state and she decided it was beneath her dignity to book them a hotel 20 minutes away. So one Friday evening she marched right up my gravel driveway in her WA polo shirt, clutching a clipboard like she was the sheriff of the county, and demanded in her shrill voice that I hand over my cabin keys so her in-laws could move in for the summer. And when I laughed, thinking it was some kind of weird joke, she doubled down, insisting that because my cabin was unoccupied most of the time, it was selfish for me not to share it with neighbors in need, and I reminded her calmly that it was my private property, legally built, inspected, and taxed, and that she had zero authority to commandeer it. But Karen's face turned beet red, and she hissed that she'd bring this up with the WA board and make sure my noncompliance had consequences, and though I brushed her off at first, figuring it was just more WA bluster, over the next week I started noticing strange things. Letters from the WA citing fabricated violations about my landscaping, photos taken of my property without permission, and even gossip spreading in our small community that I was hoarding resources, while neighbors struggled, which made no sense because this wasn't a survivalist bunker situation, it was literally just a cabin I used for guests and the occasional fishing trip, and the escalation might have stayed in WA territory if not for the bizarre twist that Karen's in-laws weren't just ordinary visitors but apparently had ties to some very shady dealings that put them on the radar of federal agencies, a fact I learned the hard way when, one Saturday morning, just as Karen was pounding on my front door with 3 other WA members behind her, screaming about community spirit and threatening fines, the sound of engines filled the valley and a convoy of black SUVs came barreling down my driveway, kicking up dust, and out stepped men in tactical vests emblazoned with DHS, armed and serious, and you should have seen Karen's face morph from smug entitlement to sheer terror as agents surrounded her and demanded IDs from everyone present, because it turned out that her precious in-laws were not just ordinary suburban grandparents but persons of interest in an ongoing investigation into money laundering and possible connections to overseas groups, and the DHS agents had tracked them to our sleepy WA community thanks to the fact that Karen, in her arrogance, had filed some kind of bogus community housing request listing my cabin as their place of residence, effectively putting my property on the map of the investigation. And as I stood there in stunned disbelief, trying to wrap my head around how my guest cabin had suddenly become ground zero for a federal raid, the situation only grew stranger when the agents asked me point blank if I was knowingly harboring fugitives, and I had to explain in detail how Karen had been demanding my cabin for her in-laws, how I had repeatedly refused, and how the only reason her relatives had even been linked to my property was because she had taken it upon herself to file fraudulent paperwork with the WA claiming she had permission to use my cabin. And as the truth came out, the agent's focus shifted entirely onto Karen, who by then was stammering, sweating, and trying to shift the blame onto me, shrieking that I was the one being uncooperative with community needs. But the DHS agents weren't buying it, and when they revealed that her in-laws were already in custody at a nearby motel after being caught with suspicious documents and unmarked envelopes of cash, Karen broke down completely, alternating between begging the agents not to arrest her and threatening to sue me for emotional damages, which of course made her look even more unhinged. And as the entire WA board stood awkwardly in the background, suddenly realizing that their ringleader had dragged them into a federal nightmare, I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and disbelief, because all I had done was say no to an entitled neighbor, and now here we were with DHS vehicles in my yard, agents combing through paperwork, and Karen on the verge of being cuffed for filing false documents and obstructing a federal investigation. And the twists didn't stop there, because when the dust settled, I later learned through public court records and whispers around town that Karen's in-laws had been running an elaborate shell company scheme, funneling money through small community organizations, including HOAs like ours, using them as cover for laundering transactions, and Karen, whether knowingly or not, had been enabling them by trying to secure them a safe house in my guest cabin, which made sense of why she was so aggressive and desperate. And while she wasn't formally charged at first, the investigation uncovered enough shady emails and financial ties to the HOA's accounts that within months our entire HOA board was dissolved under legal pressure, several members facing audits and fraud charges, and suddenly my once stifling neighborhood was free of its tyrannical HOA altogether, leaving me as something of an accidental hero, though honestly I just wanted to go back to fishing and enjoying my land in peace. But of course the saga followed me for months as reporters tried to get interviews. Neighbors whispered about the guy whose cabin got raided, and Karen, now disgraced and rumored to have moved in with distant relatives, occasionally popped up on local Facebook groups ranting about conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors, and to this day, whenever I see a black SUV drive through town, I half expect another twist to the story, because if this whole ordeal taught me anything, it's that standing your ground against entitlement can sometimes unravel secrets way bigger than you ever imagined, turning a neighborhood squabble into a federal takedown that left everyone stunned.